The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the scratching of a quill upon paper. A single flame flickered inside a narrow study in Utrecht, where a young woman bent over her desk. Around her, books in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew stood stacked, in towers higher than her shoulders. She was not supposed to be here. This was a space reserved for men, scholars, theologians, and philosophers. Yet, with each careful stroke of ink, she defied a world that had decreed her silence. She was Anna Maria van Sherman, and in the dim glow of candlelight, she carved her place in history, not with the sword of conquest or the wealth of empire, but with intellect, persistence, and faith. Beyond her chamber walls, the Dutch Republic was rising into its golden age. Canals bustled with merchants, ships sailed for distant colonies, and wealth flowed in streams of silver and spice. But within this proud society, women's voices often remained hidden, their labor unacknowledged, their genius left unsigned. And yet, some resisted the invisibility forced upon them. They traded in markets with daring authority. They painted canvases so vivid they defied time. They followed their husbands into prisons and carried the burden of exile. They became spies, reformers, and advocates in revolutions that reshaped nations. These were not the stories written into the grand chronicles of empire. They were the untold stories of women, Dutch women, whose courage, intellect, and artistry continue to whisper across centuries. Hello, I'm Dr. Adam Cameron, and this is Missing History Records. To understand the importance of these women's lives, we must first ask, what was truly at risk in their world? In the thriving Dutch Republic of the 17th and 18th centuries, prosperity seemed boundless. Merchant ships carried spices from the East Indies, maps read through the world, and art immortalized the grandeur of the Golden Age. Yet, beneath this brilliance lay a shadow. The place of women in society was fragile, uncertain, and easily erased. For many, the stakes were nothing less than identity itself. Could a woman be more than a wife or a widow? Could she be acknowledged as a thinker, a painter, or a merchant in her own right? These questions carried enormous weight, for they were not merely personal, they challenged the cultural fabric of the Republic. A misstep, a bold assertion, or a refusal to remain silent could bring ridicule, exclusion, or even ruin. Every brushstroke Maria van Oosterwijk laid upon canvas risked dismissal because she lacked guild membership. Every line Anna Maria van Sherman inscribed carried the possibility of censure by theologians who doubted women's intellect. Every step Hilleganda Wensen took into a prison cell defied the expectation that women should remain passive shadows of their husbands. And every fiery speech Ida Palm d'Elders made before the French National Convention risked branding her a traitor, a spy, or worse, the survival of their voices was not guaranteed. Their legacies teetered between obscurity and remembrance, carried forward only by fragile manuscripts, unsigned canvases, and scattered testimonies. If they had faltered, if they had remained silent, history might never have known them at all. The 17th century was a time of extraordinary transformation in Europe, and nowhere did this change pulse more vibrantly than in the Dutch Republic. After securing independence from Spain in the late 16th century, the provinces of the Netherlands forged a new identity as a republic of commerce, faith, and freedom. Its cities, Amsterdam, Leiden, Delft, Utrecht, became centers of trade, art, and scholarship. Canals mirrored the silhouettes of towering merchant houses, while harbors filled with ships carrying spices, porcelain, and silver from across the seas. The world called it the Dutch Golden Age, but this golden prosperity was not shared equally. Society was deeply structured by class, religion, and gender. Men commanded the visible roles of merchants, regents, and scholars, while women's labor was hidden behind the walls of households or, at best, tolerated in the background of commerce. Legal codes gave women limited independence. Married women were bound to their husband's authority in most civil matters. Yet widows and unmarried women sometimes carved surprising freedoms for themselves, especially in managing businesses or property. It was within these narrow spaces that Dutch women learned to maneuver with skill and resilience. Education was another contested ground. For the majority of girls, learning extended little beyond basic literacy, religious catechism, and domestic skills. Yet the Republic was unusually tolerant of curiosity and intellectual debate. In cities like Utrecht and Leiden, a few remarkable women pushed against boundaries, seeking entry into universities or scholarly circles. Anna Maria van Sherman embodied this defiance. Fluent in languages, a painter, a philosopher, she proved that the barriers were cultural, not intellectual. The arts offered another arena of struggle. Dutch painting flourished with names like Rembrandt and Vermeer. Yet behind the celebrated masters stood female painters who were rarely admitted into guilds. Maria van Oosterwijk created works of astonishing complexity, still lifes that rivaled the best of her era, but official institutions often refused her. Despite this, her paintings reached royal courts, admired by kings and emperors, a quiet triumph against exclusion. The political turbulence of the Republic also cast women into roles that few expected. Religious conflicts divided the land between Calvinists, Catholics, and dissenting sects, and politics could be deadly. When husbands were imprisoned for their beliefs, wives like Hilleganda Wensen chose loyalty over safety, entering cells and sharing suffering in acts of silent resistance. Their endurance became a testament to faith and devotion. By the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment stirred new questions of liberty and equality. Dutch women, too, found themselves drawn into these debates. Some, like Etta Palm Daelders, traveled beyond the Republic, engaging with revolutionary France and demanding women's rights before assemblies that still viewed them with suspicion. They were visionaries who imagined equality long before it was fashionable. Spies and reformers in an age where speaking too boldly could cost one everything. This was the world these women inhabited, a republic wealthy, proud, and powerful, yet also bound by conventions that sought to silence half its population. Their untold stories were forged in a crucible of opportunity and restraint, courage and risk, silence and defiance. And yet, from these contradictions emerged voices that could not be ignored. In the year 1607, within the city of Cologne, a child was born into a family of faith and learning. Her name was Anna Maria van Sherman, and from her earliest days she seemed touched by a hunger that exceeded the expectations placed upon her. As other girls learned embroidery and the keeping of households, she reached for books in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. She absorbed languages as though they were melodies, eventually mastering more than a dozen, with scholars noting she became proficient in 14. Each tongue became another key to knowledge that society insisted she should not possess. When her family moved to Utrecht, Anna's gifts attracted attention. Learned men, astonished at her precision, praised her talents, though often with the condescending tone reserved for exceptions to a rule. By custom, women were barred from universities. They could not sit beside male students, let alone stand at the lectern. But Anna would not be excluded. At the University of Utrecht, she became the first woman allowed to study, though hidden behind a curtain so that her presence would not distract her male peers. The symbolism was sharp. Her mind welcomed, her body concealed. Anna's brilliance was not limited to scholarship. She was also a painter, an engraver, a poet. She corresponded with some of the greatest intellectuals of her day, including René Descartes. In her letters she argued for the education of women, declaring that the cultivation of the mind was not a gift of gender, but of humanity itself. Her philosophy was simple yet radical. A woman's soul was as capable of seeking truth as a man's. Yet, even Anna Maria's world was shaped by limits. Her religious devotion steered her away from public rebellion. She accepted that most women would remain confined to domestic roles. But she insisted that those with the capacity for learning should not be denied. This was not revolution in the streets, but reform of thought, a quiet upheaval within the heart of European scholarship. Still, her very presence unsettled the order. Some theologians muttered that a woman trained in philosophy risked arrogance, that education might draw her from obedience to pride. Others warned that encouraging women would unravel society itself. Anna's life became a delicate balance, a beacon of what was possible, yet a reminder of the dangers of stepping too far beyond expectation. And so she wrote, painted, and taught, her legacy surviving in manuscripts and letters that spoke across centuries. She was both visible and hidden, celebrated and restrained. Her flame burned brightly, but always under the shadow of the curtain drawn across her presence. But Anna Maria van Schermen's tale was only the beginning. For while she fought her battle in the halls of scholarship, another Dutch woman would take up her struggle not with ink and parchment, but with the colors of paint and the canvas of eternity. In the year 1630, in the small village of Nootdorp near Delft, a girl named Maria van Oosterwijk was born. Her world was filled not with libraries and manuscripts, but with pigments, canvases, and the glow of sunlight spilling across tulip fields. From an early age, Maria was drawn to the language of color and form. Where others saw fleeting beauty in a flower or fruit, she saw symbols of faith, mortality, and the eternal. It was in paint that she would carve her voice, the Dutch golden age was a time when art flourished. Canvases filled with landscapes, portraits, and still lifes lined the walls of wealthy burghers and royal courts. Yet for women, entry into this realm was barred by the guilds, those powerful institutions that regulated training, sales, and recognition. Maria, despite her growing mastery, was denied guild membership simply because she was a woman. Without that approval, she could not freely market her work. Many would have surrendered. Maria did not. Her still lifes became sermons in color. In one composition, a fragile rose leaned beside a fading tulip, a reminder of life's transience. Grapes, ripe and glistening, spoke of abundance, while a skull in the background whispered of death. She was a preacher in pigment, blending theology with artistry, using the canvas as her pulpit. Patrons recognized her genius even when institutions denied her. Kings and emperors sought her works, Louis XIV of France, Emperor Leopold of the Holy Roman Empire, and William III of England all admired her paintings. Yet the paradox was cruel. Maria could achieve fame, but she could not achieve equality. She could sell to monarchs, but she could not sign the rolls of her local guild. Her legacy was thus forged in defiance, an unspoken challenge to a society that sought to silence her. Her success was not without cost. Isolation shadowed her. Marriage, often a necessity for women of her age, was something she never pursued. Some say she feared it would crush her freedom. Others suggest she chose art as her sole companion. Whatever her reasons, she lived unmarried, devoted wholly to her craft. With her studio becoming her sanctuary and her battlefield alike, Maria's canvases survive today, luminous with detail and meaning, reminders of a woman who painted herself into eternity when society refused her entry. Every brushstroke was an act of quiet rebellion, each petal and fruit a declaration that women, too, could master beauty, symbolism, and meaning at the highest level of artistry. But if Maria's rebellion was waged with stillness and symbolism, another Dutch woman chose a path more perilous. She stepped not into a studio, but into the cold cells of a castle prison, where loyalty demanded sacrifice and silence became an act of defiance. In the year 1557, Hillegonda Wensen was born into a world torn by religious upheaval. The Dutch provinces were not only wrestling with questions of independence from Spain, but also with fierce theological debates that divided families, towns, and entire provinces. Faith was no quiet matter of personal belief. It was a battlefield where Allegiances could determine one's freedom or one's ruin. It was within this climate that Hilaganda's destiny unfolded. She married Hugo Grotius, one of the most brilliant jurists and thinkers of the age. Grotius had written boldly in defense of religious tolerance and civil governance, ideas that unsettled both political leaders and ecclesiastical authorities. In the turmoil between the Remonstrants, who sought moderation in doctrine, and Prince Maurice of Nassau, who demanded rigid orthodoxy, Grotius was condemned to life imprisonment. His sentence was to be carried out in the cold, damp walls of Lovestein Castle. For many women, such a moment would have marked the end of their influence there. Husbands exiled, their voices silenced by fear. But Hilaganda chose a different path. Refusing to abandon her husband, she entered the prison alongside him, sharing his confinement in conditions that were harsh and unforgiving. There she became his caretaker, nurse, and defender, enduring the same privations that eroded his strength. In the bitter winters, she kept him warm. In his despair, she offered resolve. Her presence in those cells was more than loyalty, it was a silent declaration that tyranny could not sever the bonds of devotion. The walls of Lovestein could not mute her courage. When officials attempted to restrict Grotius's writings, Hilaganda smuggled his works to the outside world, preserving his voice and ensuring that his ideas continued to circulate. She risked censure and punishment herself, yet never faltered. In the end, the long years of imprisonment eroded her own health, and she died in 1620 within those castle walls, a martyr not to doctrine, but to love and constancy. Story rarely appears in the gilded pages of Dutch history. Men's names filled the chronicles, while women like Hilaganda were remembered, if at all, only in footnotes. And yet her sacrifice shaped the survival of Grotius's legacy, and by extension, the very ideas of law and tolerance that would echo through Europe. She had stood firm where many would have broken, her devotion becoming both shield and torch in the darkness of confinement. But Hilaganda's defiance was quiet, bound to the stone walls of a prison. Another Dutch woman, a century later, would step far beyond the walls of her homeland, raising her voice not in whispers, but in thunder, standing in the very halls of revolution itself. In the year 1743, in Groningen, a daughter was born into a modest Dutch family. Her name was Etta Palm Daelders. Unlike Anna Maria van Sherman or Maria van Oosterwijk, her canvas was not parchment or paint, nor was it the quiet loyalty of Grotius's wife. Instead, Herina would be the turbulent stage of politics, espionage, and revolution in her youth. She married a Dutch humanities student, but the marriage quickly collapsed. Later, she moved to Paris, weaving herself into the fabric of French society, cultivating friendships with diplomats, philosophers, and revolutionaries. Her charm, intellect, and fluency in multiple languages made her both captivating and dangerous. Some whispered she was a courtesan, others claimed she was an informant. Both might have been true, for Etta Palm was above all a survivor. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, its fires promised liberty, equality, and fraternity. Etta demanded something more: sorority. She stood before revolutionary assemblies, including the National Convention, and in December 1790 delivered a speech calling for women's rights, access to education, the right to divorce, civic participation. It was a radical cry in an age where women were still seen as ornaments of salons rather than architects of society. Some applauded her courage. Others branded her a threat to order. Yet Etta's story was never simple. She worked as a spy, passing information between French and Dutch circles, her loyalties questioned by all. To some, she was a feminist pioneer. To others, a dangerous double agent. As the revolution grew bloodier, suspicion devoured the city. Those who had once been allies became enemies overnight. In this climate of fear, Etta was accused of betrayal and imprisoned. She died in 1799, Under circumstances clouded by uncertainty, some say forgotten. Others suggest silence deliberately. What cannot be denied is the mark she left. At a time when women were denied voice, she thundered demands for equality before the most radical assembly in Europe. She was not content with quiet endurance. She sought transformation, even at the cost of her life. From the hidden scholar in Utrecht, to the painter denied her guild, to the wife who defied a prison's walls, and finally to the revolutionary. In Paris, the stories of these women reveal a tapestry of defiance woven across centuries. But what became of their legacy? Did their courage endure beyond their lifetimes, or did the silence of history swallow their voices once more? The answer lies in what they left behind and in how their memory still shapes us today. The voices of Anna Maria van Schermen, Maria van Oosterwijk, Hillegonda Wensen, and Etta Palm Daelders did not vanish when their candles burned low. Though many of their names slipped quietly past the chronicles of their age, their defiance has endured, carried forward in fragments of ink, brushstrokes, letters, and echoes of courage that Anna Maria van Schermen left behind, a body of writing that still challenges us to rethink the boundaries of intellect. Her insistence that women's souls were as capable of seeking truth as men's was more than a plea for education. It was an argument for equality itself, long before that word became a banner. Maria van Oosterwijk's luminous canvases still hang in royal collections, their petals and fruit speaking of both abundance and fragility, reminding us that art can transcend even the strictest walls of exclusion. Hillegonda Wensen's devotion within the stone of Loevestein Castle may have been unheralded in her time, but her loyalty preserved the life's work of one of Europe's great jurists, a contribution to law and justice that outlived her own sacrifice. And Etta Palm Daelders, though vilified in her age, became one of the first Dutch voices to demand women's rights on the stage of revolution, a vision that modern feminists now recognize as a foundation for the struggles that followed. Their stories remind us that history is never whole. For every celebrated name carved in stone, there are countless others, half erased, waiting to be uncovered. In the Netherlands today, campaigns continue to seek recognition for women who suffered. In witch hunts, for artists and scholars who were silenced, for wives and mothers whose courage was dismissed as mere duty. These movements are not simply acts of remembrance. They are acknowledgments that the past belongs equally to those whose stories were hidden. The legacy of these Dutch women lies not only in what they achieved, but in the way they force us to confront the silences of history itself. They are whispers made visible, shadows given voice, lives that insist we listen. But what of us? Do we remember merely to honor them, or do we remember to change the way we see the world we live in today? Their legacy is not only what they achieved in their lifetimes, but what they left in the silence that followed. Anna Maria's ink, Maria's colors, Hillegonda's devotion, Etta's thunderous words together, they formed a chorus that history tried to quiet, yet could never fully erase. We see their presence not only in museums or archives, but in the very questions we ask today about equality, freedom, and the value of unseen labor. The Dutch Golden Age is often remembered for its paintings, its ships, its wealth, its great men. But look closer, and you will find women who bore the same storms, carried the same burdens, and left behind traces of brilliance that defied erasure. Their stories remind us that history is not complete until every silenced voice is heard. To listen to them now is to honor their defiance. To carry their stories forward is to ensure that the untold will never again be forgotten.